Dr. Vincent Adams, by way of introduction, is considered an engineering giant and also a Guyana national cricketer. Dr. Adams is a petroleum expert who advises governments and has advised the government of Guyana in the recent past. He has the distinction of being part of a senior executive core comprising the highest ranking civilians who ran the day-to-day operations of the U.S. government in the Department of Energy, USDOE. He has been the visiting distinguished engineering professor at the University of Guyana, leading the establishment of the newly inaugurated Petroleum Engineering Department at the university to prepare for first oil. And up until a few months ago, he headed capably the Guyana Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. Dr. Adams has the unique distinction of being an expert in both the environmental and petroleum fields. And as a senior petroleum reservoir and production engineer for 6 years with AMCO, now BP, he conducted pioneering work now widely used in the industry for enhancing oil and gas recovery. During his 30 years with the Department of Energy for the US government, he led multi-billion-dollar environmental and energy projects and programs, including cleanups of the nation's nuclear weapons complex, developing technologies and standards for over 20 world-class national laboratories and universities, creating and managing the government's science, technology, and engineering and math STEM programs at 9 universities. Ladies and gentlemen, he has also served as the U.S. expert to the International Atomic Energy Agency on project management. And as well, forgive me for a minute. And as well, folks, he has been part of the transformation of the nuclear weapons technologies into applications for medicine, greenhouse gas curtailment, and fuel cells, developing the equation that models the state-of-the-art ionizing wet scrubber system for air pollution control, and formulating partnership programs with private companies for building capacity and local content. Dr. Adams is no doubt, ladies and gentlemen, he no doubt commands the respect of his peers worldwide. And if what I said isn't enough evidence to convince you, add to his resume that he has transformed 2 U.S. federal departments to becoming high-performer organizations, receiving the prestigious 2012 President's Award for contributing the most to education in the state of Ohio. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Dr. Vincent Adams.
Thanks, Sharon. Sharon, I'm glad to be the keynote speaker at this forum, because I think we're at the crossroads. You know, you asked, I think some of the questions you asked, you're right, leading the questions, where are we? And I think we are at the crossroads. You know, after 70 plus years of exploration, December 20th, 2019 marked a historic day in Guyana's history when forest oil was produced. And I'm sure most of us were shocked when oil discovery was announced in 2015, because most of us didn't even know that oil exploration was going on. And since then, you know, we've been hearing, I know we've been hearing about everything that went wrong, but there's lots of credit to go wrong to many people for getting us to forest oil, and not only getting us to forest oil, but getting us to forest oil months ahead of schedule. The nation, the diaspora, and every place else, we were all excited, and you know, as to what it's going to bring to the nation because of its vast potential to become what I always say is the richest country in the world. So lots of credit to go wrong to the political parties, PNC, PPP, AFC, the Minister of Natural Resources, the Department of Environment, the Energy, the EPA. But December the 20th, 29 is also a day that can either make Guyana the richest amongst the poorest in the world. It provided us the opportunity to become the former, which is the richest country in the world. but it's all in our hands. And when I say in our hands, I don't even mean the government hands. It's all in the people's hands. We have got to hold our politicians and the people accountable. You know, every time I hear there's always a blame on Exxon. Exxon is only going to do what we allow them to do. We own every single drop of that oil. Exxon works for us, but my biggest fear is that Exxon believes it's the opposite. We work for them, and my biggest fear also, I'm concerned, is that we and the government is allowing them to get away with whatever they want to do and giving them that feeling. Exxon didn't come here because somehow they like Guyanese or they like that. They came here for one reason and one reason alone, to make money. And I have no problems against Exxon. You know, I came up with a culture working in the US where a free market economy was the name of the game. So I'm one of the biggest advocates for a free market economy and for development to produce oil. However, it has to be done by the rules of that country where it's being developed. It has to follow the laws of that country, and we've got to impose those laws. And I do not say lightly that Guyana has the potential to become the richest country on the planet. I've been saying this in all of my public statements for years now. Look at the richest countries right now: Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, Dubai. You know, I've got my good friend, the Ambassador Shamir, is on this call here, and he was the ambassador to the UAE, and he can tell you they're not even a close fraction in terms of a potential. All they have is oil and sand. We have all the natural resources that all the rest of the world envy: water, abundance. We have additional minerals, great weather, agriculture production all year long. No types of natural disasters, earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanoes. It's just a gift. We are blessed in having everything. So oil is just an additional part. It's just an icing on the cake. The other thing is, oil will only be here for 30 years or so. So we have to use this short window to accumulate whatever wealth we have to develop some type of a strategy and implement that strategy as to what this country will be, what is going to be our sustainable economy after oil. 40 years or even 20 to 30 years is not a whole lot of time. I intend to be living around that time. It so happens that Guyana's population, believe it or not, half of Guyana's population is 28 years or younger. So even if you put it to 30 years, they're all going to be in their prime, 50 to 60 years. So we have got to decide what do we want to do with that money in terms of investment, in education, in agriculture, infrastructure, health, law and order, etc. And I've always said publicly, from that perspective, that oil is not the future of Guyana. It's more agriculture as one of the key areas. So the most important question that we should ask is not where we are today, but how we change course and which course to pursue to get to where we want to be. And it's always good to reflect on mistakes, maybe. And I don't like to say mistakes. I like to call it just lessons learned. We need to learn from the past and move on. So the question is, what do we need to put in place in a very rigorous manner to make sure that we do not make the mistakes like some other countries do, which is a big fear of many of the population. As you read the newspapers and look at the news, the big fear out there is we're going to become what some other countries have become, Venezuela, some of the African countries, etc. No, so I wanted to dwell on a few topics here that has been the hot topics over the past 5 years. Contract renegotiations, a robust oversight by the EPA, And of course, we've got some new projects. We've got, some new projects such as gas to shore pipeline. And then we've got some strategies such as depletion strategy as to how fast we produce and the sovereign wealth fund. So let me start with renegotiations. And we all know that for the past 5 years, there's been a barrage of criticism as to the current contract. And I've put in my fair share that has been leveled against the coalition government. And it was only because the agreement came to light after discovery when that party was in power. The PPP Civic would have suffered the same fate of criticism had they been in office at that time. So this must never be made political. In fact, the agreement was signed in 1999 by Her Excellency President Janet Jagan, and almost the identical contract was signed by Minister Trotman in 2016, except for a couple of minor changes. But you would swear within the last 5 years or so, and I'm not defending former Minister Trotman here, but you would swear that Trotman was the only person who got out there on his own and did whatever he wanted to do to sign this contract. That contract was done after careful evaluation and discussions within the government. And of course, like I said, the contract was signed, first of all, in 1999. But Minister Trotman did not do this on his own. It was with the behest. And as a matter of fact, he even made a statement a few months ago, as I recall, in the newspapers, but apparently it just got lost in a shuffle when he said that he was basically directed to sign the contract. And I believe that he could not go there and sign a contract. So, I'm not defending him, but I think in all fairness that it wasn't Trotman's decision. And nevertheless, the decision was made after consideration of all the facts at that point in time. So again, there should not be any we should not be used this as some political weapon, but rather to use it as a lessons learned. What must be necessary from here on out, though, is to acknowledge and understand these. From day one, I felt that a contract should be renegotiated. Even came out public on the front page of the Sunday Stabrook News, and I never forget, on February 4th, 2018, calling for renegotiations and $1 billion US in signing bonus with very good reasons. I went crossways with many of my friends, but nothing has since changed my position. I'm still baffled as to why we are so apprehensive to approach Exxon to revise the contracts, since despite what may be the impression out there, nothing in agreement says thou shalt not negotiate. As a matter of fact, the contract allows for negotiation. The conditions for renegotiation, or changing the contract, modifying the contract, is the consent of both parties, but we've not even approached Exxon to have their consent. And when I called for renegotiation going back to 2018, it was based on the fact that when Exxon, just by discovering oil in 2015, without producing a barrel of oil, Exxon value went through the roof with money on the books. They used that to leverage, to shed their high liability assets and purchase their low and lucrative liability assets, such as in West Texas. They paid, and for the past several years, they've been paying out like 13, $14 billion to their shareholders. We did not get a dime before, except, of course, before that controversial $18 million. But we did not get a dime out of that discovery. They got all of that. So they could have very well afford us $1 billion. So I think a lot of Guyanese are still puzzled as to why we did not approach it. The things I hear that really bothers me. Well, that I'm too tough on Exxon and they're gonna leave. Hell, Exxon has nowhere to go. Guyana is right now their savior. I can't find better words. I hate to put it that blunt. They're highly dependent upon us right now for their survival. They're going through some real financial challenges. But we ought to be encouraged here, again, taking politics out of it, Minister Patterson, former Minister Patterson, who is now an MP, we should all be encouraged that Minister Patterson himself came out recently, and I think it might have even been in Parliament. He says that the opposition is willing and ready to support the government if they ask for negotiation. So that takes away, it gives the government cover. So there's no excuse why we should not go after renegotiate in the interest of the country. The EPA during my tenure has proven that the contract could be changed. Besides all of this stuff that they can't change it. When Exxon came to us to sign off on the Liza 2 project, after I just arrived in, I told them flat out, because the permit that they wanted us to sign off on was they're going to be self-insured for any spill that occurs in the Gulf. So we turned to them and said, well, okay, how is this going to be covered? You guys don't have a dime. Not a dime, that's exaggeration. But you have no assets. It's not Exxon, it's EEP, Exo Exploration Guyana Limited. It's a limited liability corporation as a subsidiary of 3 parent companies. Exxon, a Chinese company, I could never pronounce their name, and Hess. So here's a new company. And by definition, a limited liability means exactly what it is, and that's the reason why it was formed. So I said, how are you going to cover anything if we have a spill without any liability? So the argument starts. Well, you know that Exxon would walk away from anything. I said, well, okay, put it in writing. So we started to threaten to bring in whoever they wanted to bring in, and we would not budge. They said they were going to be losing $1 million a day. So we said, hey, we're going to stand. It's not costing us anything. That permit is sitting on our day. It's not. So eventually they buckled and signed. And what they signed for, no other country in the world got it, which is unlimited liability coverage for any spill. And here's how it works. They had to go there and get the highest insurance that is available in the market, which was $2.5 billion. And we looked at them in the face and said, oh, hey, you know what is running British Petroleum now in the Gulf covering their spill? It's 60-something billion. Who is going to cover anything over and above the 2.5 billion? So we started arguing again. So that is where we said, you've got to put it back to the parent company. The parent companies have to cover that liability. So they signed off on the permit. That's the language we put in the permit. However, in order to do that, they were supposed to get an agreement to guarantee that from the parent company. They were supposed to get together and decide, well, how is each company going to cover that? Now, we thought it was we said, we trusted them and said we're going to sign off on the permit in Liza 2. In any case, Liza 2 is not supposed to be producing until, I guess, 2022. So put it in Liza 2 and so they've had enough time. As far as up until I left, nothing of the sort has been provided to us, even though it's in the permit. But it's just as if, it's still EPGL who signed the permit, saying that the parent company will provide it, but the parent company have not provided that guarantee. So that's one thing that you, as the citizens of Guyana, have got to be putting pressure on this government about. So that's one of the things that I'm sure Exxon and myself became crosswise, and I guess they convinced the government that they were not going to sign that thing because that was one of the conditions that I set, and I was going to hold their feet to the fire before we sign off on the PIARO. Well, of course, I think that's been stalled right now. So that's one of the areas that we need to put pressure on the government to make sure that guarantee is signed by the parent company, because if God forbid and something happens, I don't know what's going to happen to Guyana. And again, I'm not faulting Exxon. Exxon is going to do what they have to do. Like I said before, and I don't mean this negatively, they didn't come here because they like us. They came here to make money, and that's okay. That's what the company is in business for. But we need to do what we can control, which is we need to have the firepower on our side. And the mechanisms on our side, meaning the things that should be in that contract to protect our country and ourselves, and not let them have it however they they wanted. So we have got to make sure, like I said, that firepower on our side, and that ought to be one of the vision of this government, to make sure that we do that. And the other thing that I've been pushing for personally, as most of you know, is involvement of and engagement of the diaspora. I say it all the time, publicly and otherwise, that we can fill any member of the diaspora can fill any position from top to bottom in Guyana. But we've never been engaged. Governments before, the local government before, to go hire consultants, because they're foreign, that's gospel. So we still have this colonial mentality, which we have to get rid of. We're still intimidated. And let me tell you something, what galls me more than anything else is just the arrogance of Exxon. You would not believe some of the conversations that I have had in my office with some of them. But if you recall, the new manager came in just a few months ago and had this arrogant talk that they would take their business if we do not adhere to what they want. They would take their business other places. And guess what? We sat back and we took it that way. And we embolden them and making them believe that they're running the show instead of us running it. As a matter of fact, I wish, and I've said this in the headlines, I wish our government could call their bluff, because that's exactly what I did at EPA when they said that they're going to do whatever they can with the insurance. Okay? You know what? They yielded, but we allowed them to go to carry on with this arrogant talk. And I wish we can call their bluff, because I guarantee you there are lots of companies out there just waiting in line, wanting to trip over each other to get here. The unfortunate thing is that we just don't think or understand the power of leverage that we have. Like I said before, Exxon needs us far more than we need them. And they cannot survive without Exxon right now, with this 8 billion, it's just 8 billion right now that they've discovered. The United States Geological Survey has a projection of 15 billion in that basin. And Exxon is going ahead. I see they're going to be drilling like 16 more wells here pretty soon, which means that there's more discovery to come. We're looking at 20% of all of Exxon's oil inventory or assets. It's coming from Guyana. About 20%. Where the heck are they going to go? They can't leave Guyana the same way they cannot leave Texas. That's their tool. Even in their financial statements, that's what they're saying. Now, one of the biggest change, the fundamental change that I would like to see, or the critical change in the contract, besides all the other stuff, which are a lot of details, is to change that production sharing agreement to a concession type. I said it from day one, before even the contract was signed. To begin with, the PSA is a nightmare. First of all, we do not have the capacity to monitor. And if you have just a slight understanding of that PSA, the way that it works basically is that if Exxon, for every 100 barrels of oil that Exxon produces, they have up to 75 barrels of that oil every month they can take out for their cost. It's called cost oil, for their cost of investment and operation. And then they split the 25 barrels. So we get 12.5% in that. And then on top, we get another 2% in royalties. So we get 14.5%. And that can go on forever, because if any month they come and say, well, okay, it costs us 90 barrels, that 15 barrels goes over to the next month and it can roll forever. So we can go on forever paying, getting the 14%. Now, we do not have the capacity to monitor cost oil, folks. You think we've got the capacity to go out there and check their books to see who are their subcontractors? How much are they paying and whether those costs are right and what they're putting on their books? Absolutely not. Whereas if you go with a concession type contract, all you do is say, you know what? All I need is royalty. I'm going to take 25 barrels out of every 100 or 30 barrels, whatever that number is, out of every 100. And the only thing I've got to do is know to count barrels and to make sure that the meter is working correctly. I don't have, I don't need that big bureaucracy to check in and when they're gonna bamboozle us in checking the books. So that's the fundamental change that I would really I've been recommending forever. A lot of countries have got caught up in the PSAs and they're walking it back now and changing it to just a straight concession type contract. So much for the renegotiation. The environmental, the EPA role. The EPA folks, and I was fortunate and honored to have been offered that position at the EPA. I think it's the most important and critical agency in Guyana, not only for oil, but everything else, especially with this development. And up to 2 years, up to 2 years when I got there, before that, it was an agency that was big. I hate to say, but the staff would tell you that, because that's what they told me the first day I walked in, that they were an agency on paper. They were toothless tiger, and they didn't have any say in anything. They come to work, and if they get a call from a politician, they go by whatever the politician says. So they couldn't make this decision. So they were paralyzed. We came a long way by the way. Even Rod Henson, who was the manager of Exxon, great professional, before he left, he told me all the time, hey, do you know that the EPA is the most critical and important agency in Guyana? And I say that to set the stage as to how important this agency is. And there were 3 areas that we have to shore up or strengthen. First, the government has to walk the talk by providing the resources with independence and empowerment to build this capacity in the form of qualified personnel and their tools to perform. We made great progress, like I said, in the 2 years. We even set up an oil and gas unit with the help of the Bank of the World Bank. They give us $1 million and they send us a consultant working with us in the Department of Energy with Dr. Bino. We set up an entire unit of 36 highly skilled staff that I had started staffing, but we couldn't find anybody in Guyana. So the intent was in last year's budget, had it not been for COVID, for us to go out there and start recruiting from the diaspora to start with, and then going outside of the diaspora for people that we couldn't find. And of course, we didn't get started. So I'm pleading again here that we have to get that going, because one of the key things that we have to do is have on-site presence on those FPSOs 24/7. The information, in my experience, even in the United States, where I guess we've got rigorous oversight and checks and balances, over 90% of the times, what the contractor tell you happened or is happening on the site, over 90% of the time is totally different. And I can give you an example right there offshore. And this is not Exxon, it's another operator. They were drilling. And so we got a report. As a matter of fact, I was in the US at the time. So my staff called me and said that they reported that we just got some mud escaped by accident into the ocean, only 80 barrels. Of course, mud, 80 barrels going into the ocean is not a big deal, because it's just drilling mud. So I told them, because again, I know that whatever they say, it could have been just totally wrong or misrepresented. I asked my staff to get out there with a team to investigate immediately. So they got out there, and you know what it was? We escaped a disaster. The drilling mud, when you drill with mud, and what the mud does as you drill, the cuttings come up to free the hole. The mud has to be heavy enough with enough weight to keep the pressure in the reservoir. I'm sure you heard how many thousands of pounds per square inch the reservoir is operating at, for blowing out that reservoir. And then you have a British Petroleum type of spill in the Gulf. So the mud was coming up, and you circulate it. You drill, the mud brings up the cuttings, it drops the cuttings out into a basin at the top of the ship. and it circulates back that mud without the cuttings back in. And so it keeps, well, guess what? When it comes to the top, instead of going back in the hole, it was being dumped in the ocean. So we could have had an empty hole without any pressure to maintain that well. And the pressure could have blown the living daylights out of the well, and we could have had a major disaster. It's a luck thing somebody was passing by and saw that there was a valve that was open. And when they checked the same valve, it was put up for maintenance for a long time, but nobody even paid attention to go and repair that valve. So those are the little things that you miss that can cause a disaster. That is why it's so important to have a 24/7 presence on that site. We've got to tighten. I'm sure that you're even right now we've got a flaring problem. Last year alone, we had flared over 12 billion cubic feet, which was avoidable, by the way, because Exxon promised from day one. Before I was even there, Exxon promised the government that they will not flare after they were only going to flare for day one to stabilize the equipment, etc. Well, of course, you know that we were in day over 300 because we flared for over a year. And what we did at the tail end of where I was, before I left, when they weren't fixing it, we demanded that they cut back on production, and they went way down on production to cut back on that flaring of gas, to keep it a minimum production, to keep the equipment, in a safe mode, etc. Until it was repaired. And now it happens again because they promised that it's going to be fixed permanently. But we are allowing them to go ahead and flare full blast. As a matter of fact, within the last few days, there are several different, you're hearing several different messages coming out from the government and Exxon. Exxon say they're sending equipment to Germany to get it repaired. EPA is saying, well, they're going to inspect it on site, but they've got spare equipment on shore. The minister is saying, well, they're going to be operating full blast. Exxon saying, no, we cut back. It's just total chaos and confusion. So we got to tighten up that. It's just if you're not paying attention. The other thing is that we had insisted on, when I was there, as a condition for signing off on the PIARA, was to say, because of what we've experienced in LISA 1, where we really could not trust them, we're going to follow United States standards that says you cannot flare for more than 48 hours, which is 2 days. I was standing by that, and we were not going to sign off on that PIARA agreement unless they sign off to that. Well, guess what? I heard that right after I left, we've signed off to 60 days. And one of the things that we had imposed upon them is that we will not accept anything less than what they have to abide with in countries such as the United States. What is so hard or unreasonable about that? I really do not know. If you got to abide by it in another country, why can't you do the same thing in a country? It's just because basically the ice pass us, and because we are allowing it to happen. The other thing that was so arrogant of Exxon in terms of the flaring, they said, as a matter of fact, they said that it was basically okay for them to flare. Guess why? Because Guyana, and this was their justification, by the way, Guyana is a carbon sink, meaning that we are relatively, our airspace is relatively clean, which is what you can expect because we were never a highly industrialized country. So we've got a capacity to absorb their pollutants. Now, if that is not disrespectful and condescending, I really don't know what else is. So we must not allow them to do that. Ocean dumping. That was another issue that I said you will not be allowed to dump water produced with all these contaminants, etc. And not only contaminants, but it's a hell of a high temperature. Over 2.5 times the temperature of the water where they're dumping into the ocean. And on top of the other contaminants that are coming up with the water, including radioactivity. So we got to insist that they stop it. Well, of course, they were still allowed after I left. They were still allowed to be dumping water, not only in LISA 1, but they're going to be doing the same thing in the rest of the operation. But the thing is that bothers me also, we are listening to whatever they tell us, because their line is, well, it's not contaminated the water, which is absolute nonsense. And because you can't tell me that you're raising the temperature that high and then you're dumping all that material into the ocean. What is going to happen with the fish life 20 or 30 years from now? Or even the oil that is allowed to go with the water, the concentration of the oil, even though it passes the regulatory standards, when you start dumping millions of barrels per day of water into that oil, into the ocean, it adds up. You're looking at hundreds of thousands of pure barrel of oil over time with that small concentration that is going into the ocean. We do not know what's the long-term effect. But here's the dishonest part that again galls me, is that Exxon spread this nonsense or dishonesty that the World Bank is okay. Well, that's not what the World Bank said. The World Bank said that dumping water in the ocean has to be the very last resort if it's not technically feasible or financially feasible to re-inject it back into the reservoir, which is the standard practice. It's the last resort. It's both technically feasible, without question, and it's financially feasible, because what Exxon is saying, well, we can't, it's going to cost us $300 million to put in the equipment. Well, folks, you tell me, Guyanese lives and their health and well-being, what they're saying that our lives and health is not worth $300 million when they're making tens of billions of dollars off of this project. Those are the things that have to be stopped. Now, let me see here. The other thing that bothers me, when Exxon is going out to, besides the misinformation with the flaring, etc., when Exxon goes out to our students, and in the context of talking about safety, now these are our next generation. Hello? These are our next generation of people who are going to be making decisions in Guyana. And then their talk has, well, okay, when you're looking at safety, you got to make sure that you take costs into consideration. Now, that's a very, very subtle or slick message that they're telling our young engineers and scientists who are going to be making a decision for us. So that's part of what I have there for the environmental agency in terms of what's needed there and some of the major issues. Now, in terms of the projects that have been in the news recently, this whole thing about depletion strategy, meaning how fast should we produce? And again, I'm a free market economist, not an economist, but I'm a free market person. I have no problems with Exxon producing at the maximum production rate whatsoever. I think it benefits us. I do not know, or none of us know, what the oil price is going to be many years from now. I remember when I was working for Amoco, British Petroleum, we thought, well, oil prices were like 140 barrels per day at the time. And we were already planning on it getting up to above 200 barrels per day. So we were spending like drunken sailors, etc. You know what it dropped to? $9 a barrel. So I don't know what the price is going to be come 5-10 years from now. So we need to take advantage of what we get and produce. However, again, we've got to go back to those core principles of oversight. We can do, as long as they're following the laws, it's just about oversight. As long as we have the environmental controls in place, and the government, we've got to facilitate that. As long as we feel comfortable we have that in place, I have no problem with them pumping as fast as they can, and let them get out of here as soon as they can, and then we invest that money for our long-term future. And the other thing about that is, besides the price of oil, which is driven by many things, including renewables, Renewables, it's already started. We in a heck of a competition with renewables, and especially with the new administration in the Biden administration, they're going to go back to the to the Obama policies of making sure that renewables take the place. He's already been very, very specific about that. So they're going to lead the way in the world. And if you look at all of the major companies, even Exxon is taking a beating from their shareholders because all of the major companies are moving towards renewables. So I say we get as much as possible out of pumping and pump as fast as possible. However, I wouldn't advocate it if the environment. I wouldn't advocate any production, as a matter of fact, of any rate, if we do not have the environmental capabilities to monitor or to provide oversight. The next thing is the gas to shore pipeline. I also support the gas to shore pipeline. I think it's a good thing for the country in terms of reducing the energy cost and spurring lots of industrial growth, not only energy costs to the industries, but to the people themselves. With the spin-offs that it can attract and have businesses to be there after oil is gone. So we've got to think long term in terms of what would we leave Guyana with after oil is gone. So we've got to make sure that we develop that sustainable infrastructure and education, etc. So I think that the gas to shore, I think it's a good project that we should support. However, again, it has to be grounded in strong environmental protection. And if that's not the case, for example, when the government comes out and say, well, the first government, the previous government, they had done a study that it was supposed to be at Mahaica, I think, which is closer. But for whatever, I'm not going to get into the economics and that type of stuff, because I know economics and politics goes into these decisions. So that's okay. So they had made the study that it was going to come off at Mahaica. Then the next thing you know, there was a decision, sounded as if it was made overnight, that it's going to go to Wales, catch everybody by surprise. And when it was asked, the government said, well, we did a study. And when they were asked to produce the study, until now, no study could be produced. And here's in Wales now, you've got 90% of the marine traffic has to pass coming into Guyana, cargoes, commercial, and etc. has to, pass that area. So it had to be dragged. We cut that simple cable every time that crosses the Demerara, mouth of the Demerara River. So you could imagine, especially with the increase in activity, and if you go up the Demerara River, they're having all kinds of industrial facilities at the mouth of the Demerara River as you go up these banks. So that there's going to be a high traffic area that is going to multiply several fold. So you put that pipeline at risk, and then it now becomes 160 miles of pipeline, from what I understand, that is going to be resting on the bottom of the ocean, and it's going to leak. It's impossible for you to stop a pipe from leaking. Or when it starts leaking, gas is very toxic to fish and marine life. So what is that maintenance that you're going to put together to make sure that you can monitor that leak and repair it as soon as possible? So those are the kind that, which means that you have to have an environmental impact assessment, which means that the whole public have to get involved, and we should get involved actively to make sure that those type of things and controls are put in place. Again, I support all of those developments only and if good environmental oversight and regulations and controls are provided. Now, in closing, let me say this, that the one thing that I think that has been missing since the past government, and I am not seeing it. Well, let me go to the sovereign wealth fund before I get to that. The sovereign wealth fund is another thing that I've said it before. I've said it from day one. I do not agree that we need a sovereign wealth fund. And until now, for 5 years now, nobody could convince me why. And let me tell you, all I hear is, well, corruption. And we've got to put aside money for the next generation. Well, let me tell you, a sovereign wealth fund is investment. And guess who we're giving this money to invest? Foreign bankers. They're the ones who are going to be making money off it. We got to pay them a fee. And God forbid we get into some financial crisis like we get into 2008. I'm not sure what's going to happen with that investment. The best investment we can make today is in our country, in our youths, in education and infrastructure, etc. I guarantee you that that's going to pay out sometime. I'm not sure whether this whole thing about putting money in the bank for the next generation. We need to make education free from kindergarten right through university. So that's the investment that I would go with. This whole thing about sovereign wealth fund, and even in your basic life, do you go invest in the stock market if you don't have food on the table or you can't pay rent? We've got Guyana is one of the poor countries in the hemisphere, if not the world. So here we are saying we're going to go put money in an investment. So I want to ask each and every one of you, if you would go and invest if you do not have food on the table to take care of that food or to pay rent or to send your kids to school. That's to me, and I might be too simplistic, that's what a sovereign wealth fund is. When I hear, well, you're going to pull out the argument and whether you're going to take 4% out of it to put it, I mean, that it just, so I am totally against it. But I'm sure that there's smarter people than me, except that they can't convince or change my stupidity, the people who should know better. But anyway, so the other thing, speaking about the sovereign wealth fund, and how do we spend the money for the next generation, etc. That, I in public have been calling for, it's a national strategic plan. How do you integrate all of this stuff? You got money coming in from oil. How are we going to spend that money in terms of abroad? Or what is our vision? Where do we want to take the country 2 years from now, 5, 10 years from now? What we do with our budget it's every year in a vacuum. Every agency or every ministry go to the government and say, well, okay, I need this money for next year. That money for next year should be part of a long-term strategy to get to a vision. That's the only way that I know to do it. So that when it goes to Parliament should say, well, okay, how does this fit in? You don't have to show me anything that I'm producing for this year, but how does it fit into the long term? It may not show any progress this year, but it would eventually show benefits in the long term. So strategic development plan is something that is so critical. You can't know where you're going. I mean, when you do these budget or how to spend money without that type of a plan, and a plan is not rigid, by the way. It changes probably every month or every 6 months. A plan is flexible. It's made to change. So when we do these budget cycles, it should be tied to that strategic plan that has a vision, 3, 4, 5, 10 years from now, where we're going to be getting. And so when you come up with your budget for your request, say, well, here's how I fit into that strategic plan. So that's one of the big things that are missing that we need to definitely have in place. So Cheryl, that's my take until, I'm sure, we expect a lot of questions. Thanks for listening.
Dr. Adams, thank you for a sterling presentation.